started writing this review when no game was bigger than WoW Classic, 10 years later. I feel that there's so many things Borderlands 3 could learn from that movement in gaming. Writing now, there is nothing more that comes to mind than Generation Zero when thinking of Borderlands 1. Generation Zero is a rough, around-the-edges open-world co-op action RPG where the player is tasked with solving the mystery of why all the people are gone and the robots everywhere are killing people on Sweden. Generation Zero, like early Elder Scrolls titles and the first Borderlands, is ripe with obvious issues, like falling through the map, it's impossible to go through water, frustrating bugs and glitches, overly complex level design, etc. And a redundancy of features like stamina and multiple rarities of lockpicks in the case of Generation Zero, but underneath it all is creative ambition, charm, and complexity. Game development hates the trifecta by its very nature. A team creates a new IP, hones an engine to their own use, or creates their own, and invest large chunks of time and money, new programming assets, new art assets, all into this brand new IP. And that IP, successful enough, can be recycled from what's been accomplished, refined, and expanded upon to create a typically optimum product in the sequel. Now, not every time, but it's a general truth that in video games, the sequels tend to have a fairly quick turnaround, even in our age of always online live service, and tend to be better than the original, just by retooling what was so good about the original. But in general, in video game history, the third game, Halo 3 withstanding, tends to be the redheaded stepchild. Borderlands and Borderlands 2 were the perfection of this model, and the third game, for all it's good, feels like an out-of-time orphan as a result. Which isn't to be too insulting because I know the feeling. I've got 7 years between my middle sibling and 10 years apart from my oldest sibling. The world changes. My experience of growing up was very different from theirs. But, of course, this isn't a video about Borderlands 3, but it's so hard to not think about modern games in the context of Borderlands, or in your case, the viewer, any favorite game you have from the past. How much of that is rose-tinted glasses and games in the past being generally better, and how much of that is a true notion that there was a golden age of gaming in the early 2000s and late 90s? That's a tale for another day. It's important to look at the roots, however, with this Borderlands 1 capstone, see how a game can become ossified, as I feel that the franchise of Borderlands has become. Like Generation Zero, early Elder Scrolls, or Fallout titles, new IPs break ground. Borderlands 1 fits just that model, and it's why it's so important. 10 years later, the weaknesses it presented, such as story, have been softened by Gearbox's new devotion to their lore. But what stands out is their full accomplishment of their objective to have the looter meet the shooter, an objective that ultimately changed the entire game industry. Borderlands was the video game equivalent to Night of the Living Dead. Romero reimagined horror, and we haven't been safe from zombies or survival fiction since. Borderlands, I would say, invented the looter shooter, and we haven't been safe from the nigh necessity of action RPG mechanics getting into every genre of video game. There's zero Destiny without Borderlands 1 and 2. There's no Anthem, Division, Dying Light, Dead Island, you name it, all the way down to indies like Generation Zero. Every game hence has taken what Borderlands did so well and ran with it, which, while a separate topic, is a mixture of sad, notable, but methinks ultimately the arc of time that the genre has quite possibly passed Borderlands. What remains, what will always remain, like the bedrock under our feet, is the fundamentals that make Borderlands great. Borderlands is a product of 10 years ago, and to understand how pioneering it was, we have to look at the competition at the time. First and foremost, that the preponderance of predictions that you had heard about the time of Borderlands was that it was going to be a flop, and that it was only trying to mimic Fallout 3, and everyone had already had enough of that game already. Anyhow, only a year earlier, Bethesda's reimagining of the Fallout universe sold great, reviewed great, and was considered by most accounts to be great, including myself. You can watch our capstone here on this channel. However, as covered in our capstone of Fallout 3, for all its victories, being a great FPS was not one of them. Perhaps you could argue that Fallout 3 was just a product of its time, but only 1 year later, Borderlands would blow Bethesda out of the arena in this regard. A mainstay of RPGs of the time was that hitting a target was either void of skill or only allowed skill in as a measure of the result. RPG games like Morrowind, but most others of the time, devolved into holding the attack button on repeat, hoping to roll a hit. titles like Initiative, Agility, and a practice still in effect today of Resistance dictated the flow of the game over a player's aim or movement or ability. Borderlands took the first step in throwing this equation out of the window. Borderlands 1 is a proper shooter, with sure, generous aim assist and some surprisingly smooth movement that has aged well 10 years on. A graphically interesting but largely flawed ADS mechanic, and an emphasis on violence and action. 10 years later, I believe it's a testament to Borderlands, and I believe the unsung strength of Gearbox as a first-person shooter developer, in that the game stands up with shooters today. Mechanically responsive, solid in its feedback and sound design with, take note Borderlands 3, shotguns, pistols, and sniper rifles that plow into enemy health bars, assault rifles that carry massive magazines with their submachine gun cousins spitting absolute fire. Again, we're so accustomed to dual-stick shooters with an emphasis on player skill today that we can forget just how far ahead Borderlands was in this area. If you want proof, go back and play GoldenEye or Conker's Bad Fur Day, because for all the nostalgia they receive, you will feel and experience just how antiquated they play. The marriage was that this skill-based shooter was married to the action RPG. Now, there are many ways to produce role-playing mechanics. The truly old school would feel that that's a bastardization of the term anyway, but the first and easiest is to just have the level ups give a small amount of base health and create a weapon pool per level. All damage and growth is experienced in gear. It's simple, it works, but the effect can be destroyed when a player at a high level goes into a low level environment without their high level gear and finds their strength hasn't truly increased. The reboot of Gauntlet used this system. The second is to produce a deep RPG like Baldur's Gate or Elder Scrolls Fallout, etc. that was a mainstay of the titles of yesteryear. Truly interesting but largely wasteful skills like acrobatics or bludgeoning were added to the game. I'm the first person to ask if you want a criticism of the so-called refinement of the genre that Skyrim represents. A deep RPG is thin to its base elements, and in the process, a lot of diversity and options for the player fly out the window. Borderlands married the two, and it's a system now as prevalent as McDonald's and Starbucks on street corners. The player receives a base damage increase, health pool increase, a damage resistance increase, while gear still largely dictates strength. In this way, a higher level character by their base power can annihilate lower level enemies and see their power increase, but they are also blocked, like the first system, from killing enemies too far above their levels just by resistances being stronger than the player's base damage. Borderlands then takes a page right out of Diablo 2's playbook and gives the player the game within the game that is skill trees. Diablo 2 largely credited with the creation of skill trees. Much more limited in overall options in an open system like Skyrim, sure, the diversity comes through gear choice and skill choice to create interesting combinations. Ultimately, Borderlands 1 is the actual synergy of Halo and Diablo 2, a game steeped in both, as Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford opened up to IGN about. They played and ported Halo to PC and saw Borderlands in the strange code coming over from originally Mac developer Bungie.
And so we got to see that and play with it and add to it, and it taught us a lot of stuff. The thing I think was the most profound was how everything was data driven, and we totally different architecture, different practices, but we took that seed of thinking. It's like a way of thinking, and it changed the way we thought, and then we developed a new way of thinking that led to how we invented this technology that lets us procedurally generate all the weapons in Borderlands. Yeah. And that and I know like from the outside it seems like this massive gap, but for us it was like Halo, Borderlands, like that like the development string was that for us.
This is the pioneering nature of the first IP. Like so many others, a new thing was born from something old. As George Bernard Shaw said, good artist copy, great artist steal. Ahead of their time in trend-setting in another way, Borderlands offered a collection of fairly priced, Underdome withstanding DLCs. This was the time of horse armor, keep in mind, and yes, some full-price standard DLC fare, but on the whole, DLC was still sowing its oats on console and trying to feel the market out, beginning to open up on consoles what PC had known for years. A time when the big three put caps on the amount of patches a game was allowed, and adding so much DLC, at least on the Xbox, going over memory caps, meant that DLC had to be free. Borderlands 1 has one truly terrible DLC, called the Underdome, which is great in concept, so much so that every game since has tried to improve upon the idea and introduced a player favorite, fan favorite Mad Moxie, but is so repetitive, long, unrewarding, and destroyed by a cruel checkpoint system that the entire package is to be avoided at all costs. It gives me no pleasure in saying so, as I feel the Underdome's reward of skill points for the lower arenas is something that not just Borderlands 3 would be wise to keep in mind, but any other looter shooter. Completing truly difficult content should be supremely rewarding to the player. It's just a game after all. The 4 to 6 hour long arenas without the ability to save, for so-called bragging rights, is a clear indication of content rushed. Thankfully, Nox created what we know as Borderlands endgame today, with crawler max, and thus began a fruitful relationship for Borderlands 1 with side quests giving powerful uniques that tie into builds, and farming ad nauseum raid bosses were that truly necessary piece of gear. Something I love about the Nox DLC is that Gearbox seemed so tuned to their community and their game. Rocket launchers, just like today, underperform in Borderlands. What Gearbox did to fix this in the Nox DLC was just design a rocket launcher that made up for these failings, creating the Pearlescent Undertaker, a rocket launcher that just shoots 50 rockets. Pearlescent being a rarity that Gearbox claims they have no plans to return to, just like they have no plans to create more DLC characters, or apparently much else. Again, this is a day and age all about minimizing. At best, under-promising, one can hope. New builds were created within the Nox DLC by Gearbox fully utilizing everything they knew, and unlike their game today, I would argue, and so many other games today to be fair, the powerful builds like Double Anarchy Lilith and Blastmaster Brick weren't mangled, but given new options. Post-Nox Brick could be made into a tank with an Ashen Shield. Post-Nox Lilith could become a sniper, an Iridian Warrior with the right class mod, or in this case, anybody could be changed because they added manufacturer loyalty class mods. Just things like that that really changed it up and created incentive for the player. I get frustrated by the serious tone developers take with balance in PvE games, because they age, just like Borderlands has, and all the fine-tuning, I think, is for naught when it's all said and done. When your game goes into the $5 bargain bin at Walmart or GameStop, the fact that level 50 players, that Poverty Timmy has to pick up this game and he's now gonna sink 2,000 hours into just trying to get that one gun that does slightly more damage than the other gun, I just think is silly. So in an RPG, feeling your character become an obliterating god in the face of that challenge is the reward. Understandably, not a Borderlands 3 video, even though I've talked about it quite a bit here. It's difficult to justify, in my mind, making a boss take 15 minutes to kill for 3 purples, a trash legendary, and anytime gear appears that allows the slot machine to be rolled faster, aka kill the boss a little quicker, they nerf it. Borderlands does not suffer from this problem. The first playthrough is gentle enough that a range of different builds can be utilized and experimented with. The second playthrough is difficult enough to warrant a set build, sure, which I am not against difficulty, mind you, and require the farming that is a core aspect of Borderlands. However, the player can see and feel their power increasing from these efforts, so much so that players still hunt Pearlescence to this day. Some people haven't even got Pearlescence to this day, which is a whole nother argument, but it says something to the staying power of Borderlands 1. People still farm. I still even can feel a desire to farm for those extremely rare variants of powerful weapons. If the player gets the ultra rare gun in Borderlands, you will devastate your foe, which to my mind is the optimum design of any action RPG, the reaping after the sowing. Point being, all the DLC outside of the Underdome's second long arena represent significant growth for the game, and for Borderlands as a whole. Outside of Dr. Ned's Zombie Island, which is worth playing as one of the best Halloween offerings in any game to my mind, all the DLC of Borderlands Classic expanded not just the lore and arsenal, like 2 and 3, but created new mechanics. With all this said, the digressions into comparing 1 and 3, it's worth noting that 1 still shows its age in other regards. Think of taking every quality of life change that 2 and 3 added to the game, and taking all of that away. In fact, what was a free patch for Steam cost us on console $30 at launch. A game I'd bought in 2009 at launch, later repurchased digitally on the Xbox One, and I had to buy a third time when it got remastered. The remaster element allowed me to see just how much Gearbox put into their Horizons and Skyboxes, compared to the claustrophobic fog effect on 360. It also gave me 60 FPS, a few extra guns, and a largely useless golden chest. But is that worth buying the game a third time? Well, no. If you're revisiting the game through Steam, great. Everything I've been talking about with Borderlands as far as its strengths are concerned pertains here as a worthwhile revisit. Not only a worthwhile revisit, but arguably the ultimate Borderlands experience next to 2. Is it worth $30 for those who never experienced the game? Yes, of course. Especially the whole franchise across the board still does something that so many other games fail to do. It has split screen. It's simple, jump in, jump out multiplayer where your character is persistent. It has the RPG. It has the shooting. It has the story. So it's just like Castle Crashers. It's one of the few games, as successful as the genre is, and as much as everyone loves these kinds of games, there's not that many that are as simple and easy to jump into as Borderlands. Borderlands is, hey, I got my buddy, we gotta play a game, we both love to shoot things, we both love RPGs, what are we gonna play? Borderlands, and Borderlands always comes to mind. However, I can't say that the graphical update in the context of Borderlands 3 existing is worth buying the game a second or third time, except to us fans that buy up everything in the franchise now. In fact, what's frustrating about this remaster is that all the old bugs and frustrating glitches are all still here in their former glory, falling through floors, enemies being stuck in the environment. That's just the little ones. Let's get to the big. The multiplayer is absolutely lag-ridden, at one point being unplayable, and I have not played since that point, and I have heard no news that it's actually fixed yet. It just seems that game, it was supposed to receive one more big patch. It never came. I assume in the context of 3 needing a lot more love, and I do not think that the multiplayer is fixed yet, but you'd have to check on that yourself. But the point is, it was laggy even when it was working. So yeah, you get some auto pickup, but and some other little quality of life changes from Borderlands 2, but you do not get the fast travel and DLCs, which I think was just something they should have added it. It's just that simple. It's the most frustrating aspect of the first Borderlands. Is it the ideal way to experience the first Borderlands if you've never played it before? Yes, it is. For all the reasons I argued previously. Is it right that PC had a free patch and console was ostensibly upcharged for some graphic fidelity? No, not at all. All this having been said, the first and ultimately the final thing that always comes to my mind, and always came to my mind when playing the game, was that for every single loot box I opened in this game, red chest or not, EA would have charged me at least $1. Gearbox lets us play games the way God intended. Private ownership, and you can play it offline. Borderlands 1 gets a 3 out of 3.